When you begin to prep for any section of the GMAT, your first step must be to establish a clear understanding of what kind of questions to expect on that section and what skills those questions are testing for. In the next 12 minutes, I will point out some important resources which you must pay attention to as you begin your prep for the Data Insights section and share some of my key takeaways from them. Today is day 18 of my GMAT prep. On day 17, I had taken the official GMAT Focus Edition Practice Exam 2 on MBA.com. My objective was to do well on the quant section because that is where my prep has been focused till now. My secondary objective was to gauge where I stand on the Data Insights and Verbal sections with minimal preparation. The outcomes of Practice Exam 2 were in line with what I had anticipated. That is a signal that the study plan which I had made on day 11 of my prep is working as expected and I can continue to follow it for the time being. The only time to question your study plan is if one of the outcomes of your interim check-ins is misaligned with what you thought it would be. Given that context, today I'm going to focus on two things. First, I will finish up a pending task from day 17 of my preparation that pertains to the quant section of the GMAT. This task was to read through the solutions in the GMAT official guide for practice sets 7 and 8, which I had attempted on previous days. After that, I will jump into Data Insights preparation. I hope that I will get to attempt at least one full problem set today. Of course, as has been the pattern with all of these videos, after every set of actions, I will share my insights, progress, and recommendations with you. Do know that this is the first time I'm preparing for the Data Insights section myself, so a lot of the things that I say are me learning as I go. There is one important call out I want to make relating to the Data Insights section. On day 11 of my preparation, I had explained some of the limitations of the online question bank when it comes to its utility for practice sessions, given the way I like to design those practice sessions. I had arrived at the decision to use the physical official guide for my practice sessions because of those limitations. The problem is that that decision only works for the quant and verbal sections. Having given 2 practice exams, I am beginning to realize that the computer interface actually plays a very important role on the Data Insights section, especially with questions where information is spread across different tabs or with questions that require you to sort items in a table. There is no way that you could be solving these questions off a printed book. As a result, I don't think there is a way to escape the online question bank as far as preparing for the Data Insights section is concerned. The question then becomes, how do you use it well? That is a question that I will also try to answer in my study session today. Note that for the quant and verbal sections, I will continue to use the physical official guides for my practice sessions for the same reasons that I had described in more detail on day 11. With that said, it is time for me to get going with today's prep. Alright, so that took me about 30 minutes. All I did during this period was really just read through the solutions to questions on practice set 7 and practice set 8, which I had solved a few days back. I only have one worthwhile learning to share. This has to do with problem set 7, which consisted of questions 7, 17, 27, and so on from the GMAT official guide version 2023-24. What I realized is that I had actually solved question 27 incorrectly, and the reason was that I had misunderstood what quantity the question was asking for. However, as luck would have it, the quantity that I calculated and the quantity that the question was asking for ended up being equal. That is the reason why I thought on the day that I'd answered this question correctly. Reading through the question again, I realized how easy it is to misinterpret this question. So what I've done is just made a note to return to this question and try again at some point of time in the future. That will just help me remember the lesson. So that's all for the quant section today. I will now transition my focus to the Data Insights section. I actually want to start by spending a few minutes to look at the physical official guide as well as the online question bank, just to recheck what each of them has to offer that can be helpful for my Data Insights preparation. I will spend a few minutes after that strategizing and then jump into practice. So let's go. Alright, so it's been about 15 to 20 minutes at this point. I started off by just glancing through the contents of the physical official guide once again, as well as looking at the online question bank on my computer here. I was particularly trying to find content on the different types of questions to expect on the Data Insights section, so I can plan my prep in a more streamlined manner. One very important thing I noticed in the process is that the physical official guide seems to have some content that is not provided in the online question bank. There might be more things than just this, but for today, here are the things that I want to highlight. Let us start by looking at the table of contents in the physical official guide. If you have been following me along, you know that I read chapters 1 and 2 in the early days of my GMAT prep. Because I had already read this content by the time I had registered for the online question bank, I did not even notice that these 2 chapters are actually not made available there. Following those 2 generic chapters, the GMAT official guide gets into chapters that focus on each of the 3 sections of the GMAT Focus Edition. You get chapters in pairs. So for example, you have chapter 3, which is Math Review, and chapter 4, which says Quantitative Reasoning. Math Review just covers some of the basic concepts that you will need to revise in order to attempt the problems on the quant section of the GMAT. Chapter 4 4, which is called quantitative reasoning, gets into the specifics of how that section is modeled on the GMAT Focus Edition. As you can see in the subsections, it introduces you to the section first, then covers some tips for answering questions in that section, and finally closes with some section instructions. After that, all you have are practice questions, answer key, and answer explanations. You can see the same pattern repeat with the data insights section as well. So you have data insights review followed by a chapter called data insights, which seems to cover topics relevant to that section as it pertains to the GMAT Focus Edition. If you have been following me through my GMAT preparation, you know that I've already read through math review, data insights review, and verbal review on previous days of my preparation. However, I had done that from the online question bank. So as you can see, if you go to the lessons tab in the online question bank, you see sections for data insights review, verbal review, and quant review. However, what the lessons tab of the online question bank does not seem to cover is the content of chapters 4, 6, and 8 from the physical official guide. To be clear, I'm referring to the initial 2 or 3 sections. The online question bank does feature all the practice questions, even though the format in which it is presented is slightly different from the way you would see it in the physical official guide. Given that finding, I actually want to spend some time reading through the initial sections of these chapters. For today, I will just focus on covering the quant reasoning chapter and the data insights chapter. Chapter 4 is less important for me because, as you know, I've given the GMAT before, and even though there have been changes in the format of the quant section as well, I'm already at a point where I am relatively comfortable with the quant section. So I will just skim through that content. Chapter 6, on the other hand, is entirely new to me, and hence I want to pay close attention while going through the contents there. So I will get to that next. Alright, so I've spent about 50 minutes at this point reading through chapter 4 and chapter 6 from the physical official GMAT guide version 2023-24. I also spent some time towards the end just thinking about what the content means for me as far as my GMAT prep is concerned and as far as my test taking strategy is concerned. The relevant content in chapter 4 was only a couple pages long, so that hardly took me any time. It is chapter 6 where I spent most of that time. Because the purpose of this video is primarily to share what my day-to-day experience preparing for the GMAT looks like, I will focus only on the points that I found relevant for me. I will make a more structured video about the data insights section sometime in the future and link that somewhere up here, so go check that out if you're interested. Let's talk about the key points that I found relevant for my GMAT preparation. First, there are 5 types of questions that will feature on the data insights section. I will shortly show you what those 5 types are, but going by just that small piece of information for a start, I think I might benefit from slicing my data insights preparation by question type, at least at the beginning. Based on empirical experience and my knowledge of psychology, I believe that human beings extract the maximum learnings about a topic when we immerse ourselves into it in a controlled manner. Variety is good, but not beyond a certain point. You're better off specializing first and then slowly increasing variety in order to develop wider expertise. Without diving into that principle too much, my intention is to practice a single question type at a time at the beginning of my data insights preparation to give my brain the space to recognize patterns, which will help me attack questions of that specific type better. Right now, this is just a thought. I want to think about that a little bit more before I commit to that approach. The next thing I want to touch upon is the discovery that the data insight section is different from the quant and verbal section in 3 specific ways. First, it requires you to solve multiple questions at the same time. Second, it offers an on-screen calculator during the final test. And third, it is not computer adaptive. I'm not surprised by points 1 and 2 at all, because having attempted some questions from the data insight section on the practice exams, these were things I noticed even though I was not consciously strategizing around them. However, it looks like both of these things are factors that need to inform your strategy for attacking the data insight section. Let's take each of those points one at a time. The first is that the data insight section will require you to solve multiple questions at a time. This is true for 4 of the 5 question types that will feature on the test. Each question will require you to select anywhere between 2 to 3 different answer options. So in reality, you're not answering 20 questions on the data insight section, but more like 30 to 50 questions, depending on the mix of questions that you get. The biggest implication of this is that your time management strategy for the data insight section cannot be to allocate equal amounts of time per question. This is simply because one question might require you to answer 3 sub-questions, while another, which might be of the type data sufficiency, will only require you to pick one answer option. Of course, when it comes to time management, you can do some kind of averages, let's say over 5 or 10 questions, but tracking time at a question by question level or over small groups of questions like 2 questions or 3 questions at a time is likely going to lead to time management errors on the data insight section of the GMAT. Again, this is just an initial thought. I will keep this in mind going forward, and as I practice more questions from this section, my thinking on this topic might evolve. Let's talk about the on-screen calculator next. I did read mentions of this when taking the practice exam, where I saw instructions for the data insight section. While I did not use the on-screen calculator on practice exam 1, I did use it on practice exam 2. In hindsight, as I think about it, I did notice that the calculations on the data insight section are a little more tedious than the ones you will encounter on the quant section of the GMAT. Hence, using the on-screen calculator smartly will likely help you get past velocity issues on this section. The third point, which said that the data insight section on the GMAT is not computer adaptive, actually had me stumped for a minute. I actually went back and referred to my notes from day 1 of my GMAT prep and also looked at chapter 1 from from the GMAT official guide. I found conflicting pieces of information that I'm going to show you on the screen. First, if you look at chapter 1, page 4, you see that there is a sentence here which says all 3 GMAT sections are computer adaptive. On the other hand, chapter 6 on page 215 reads as follows. Unlike the GMAT exam's quantitative reasoning and verbal reasoning sections, the data insight section is not computer adaptive. Based on the critical reasoning skills that I've developed through preparing for the GMAT, I conclude that statement 1 and statement 2 together are not sufficient to arrive at a conclusion. Even my jokes are about the GMAT now. FML. Anyway, I did a quick search on this topic and found a screenshot from the online question bank indicating that sometime in the past there was a notification saying that page 215 actually had an error and all 3 sections of the GMAT Focus Edition are actually computer adaptive. Personally, I think the data insight section being computer adaptive is a good thing for all test takers. If it were not computer adaptive, people who don't do well on the section will not be able to get through most of the questions. Consequently, they might not be able to mark answers on all the questions within the data insight section and end up getting penalized for not completing the section as per GMAT scoring algorithm. That would result in a bipolar distribution of GMAT scores, which would interfere with the purpose of the test itself. Having said that, the image that I saw and which you're also seeing on the screen is from some online forum, and for all you know, it was generated by ChatGPT. That said, for now, I will just assume that the data insight section is actually computer adaptive. Sometime later and potentially off camera, I will try and spend some time searching online a little bit more to figure out if I can find more information on this front. I might even message the GMAT to confirm the answer to this question before I take the test. More about that in the future. The last point that I want to get into is the following. I read through the information about each of the 5 question types that are going to feature on the data insight section, and I summarized it in this beautiful table that you're seeing on the screen. Now, obviously, each of these question types seem to have names that have 20 syllables each. So I will try to avoid saying their names so that I don't end up literally biting my own tongue. As you can see, with the exception of data sufficiency, all the other question types on this section actually have sub-questions, meaning that on every screen corresponding to one of these question types, you will need to select 2 to 3 different answer options that may or may not be related. To get credit for a question, you will need to answer all of its sub-questions correctly. So for example, if you were answering a table analysis question, you would have to select yes or no against 3 different statements. Your selections for each of those 3 statements will have to be right for you to get credit for that section. This is critical information because it is telling us that we cannot be half-assed in answering any question on the data insight section of the GMAT. Either commit to solving all sub-questions under a given question or just select arbitrary options and move on to the next one. I also suspect that my lower accuracy on the data insight section from the practice tests and from the couple of days of basic prep that I had done for this section might have something to do with this particular feature. I might have answered only 1 or 2 out of 3 things correctly on a question and ended up getting no credit as a result. So this is something that will be top of mind for me as I prep for the data insight section. Alright, so that is all for today. Remember to hit like, subscribe and bell. It will help you practice making 3 clicks at a time because you will need to do that a lot on the GMAT, where you have to select an option, click on the next button and then also click on the confirm button to finally move to the next question. I am not kidding about that second part. It is indeed something that I had to do a bunch on the practice exams that I've taken till now. And as you can tell, I love spending my exam time on clicking things. Here is a bonus thing you can click on. There is an Ask Me Anything link in the video description. You can ask me questions about the GMAT, the purpose of life, or cool things to do this weekend. I answer 5 questions via email every single day. I will stop there and catch you in the next video.